He had everything money could buy, but sleep had abandoned him 3 months ago. Marcus Whitmore sat in his penthouse office at 3:27 in the morning, staring at the city lights below through floor-to-ceiling windows that stretched 42 stories above the concrete jungle. The glass walls that once made him feel powerful, like a modern-day king surveying his domain, now felt like a prison. Every shadow seemed to move with malicious intent. Every reflection looked wrong, distorted, as if the very air around him had been poisoned by guilt. The fortune of $12 billion meant nothing when your mind had become your enemy. Marcus pressed his palm against the cold glass, leaving a handprint that slowly faded. Below him, the city pulsed with life, even at this ungodly hour. Delivery trucks rumbled through empty streets. Night shift workers hurried between buildings. People lived their ordinary lives, blissfully unaware that high above them, one of the most powerful men in the country was slowly losing his sanity. He turned away from the window and walked to his mahogany desk, each footstep echoing in the cavernous office. The space was designed to intimidate, with its dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and priceless artwork. Oil paintings of stern-faced industrialists watched him from their gilded frames, men who had built empires without conscience or hesitation. Marcus had once admired them. Now their eyes seemed to follow him with accusation. Marcus had built his empire from nothing, clawing his way up from the very bottom of society's ladder. Orphaned at 7 when his parents died in a house fire, he had been shuffled through a series of foster homes where he learned that survival meant being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than everyone else. By the time he aged out of the system at 18, he had already developed the cold calculation that would serve him in business. Scholarships had gotten him through Harvard Business School, but it was his willingness to do what others wouldn't that had made him rich. While his classmates worried about ethics and social responsibility, Marcus focused solely on profit margins and market domination. By 35, he owned half the real estate in the city, transforming rundown neighborhoods into luxury developments that generated massive returns. By 40, his tech investments had made him untouchable, a titan of industry whose name appeared on the covers of financial magazines. Now at 42, he was haunted by something no amount of money could fix. The nightmares had started after the accident, the car crash that took his assistant, Elena Martinez, 3 months ago on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening that had changed everything. She had been more than an employee. In a world where Marcus trusted no one, Elena had somehow broken through his defenses. She had been the only person who truly understood him, who saw past the cold exterior to the broken boy, who still lived inside the billionaire's body. Elena had worked for him for 5 years, starting as a junior assistant and gradually becoming indispensable. She managed his schedule, handled his most confidential correspondence, and somehow made his sterile office feel like a place where human emotions were allowed to exist. She brought fresh flowers every Monday, kept his favorite coffee stocked, and never flinched when his temper flared during difficult negotiations. More importantly, she had been the one person who could calm the storm that raged constantly in his mind. When the pressure of running a business empire became overwhelming, when the loneliness of his isolated existence threatened to consume him, Elena would appear with a cup of coffee and a gentle smile that reminded him he was still human. Before we continue, comment below which city and country you're watching this story from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment to subscribe and leave a like. Marcus rubbed his temples, trying to push away the memory of that rainy night that replayed in his mind like a broken film reel. Elena had been driving to meet him for dinner at Chez Laurent, the upscale French restaurant where they had shared many working meals over the years. She never made it. The police said it was an accident, a simple case of bad weather and worse luck. A delivery truck had run a red light at the intersection of 5th and Main, slamming into Elena's silver Honda Accord with enough force to kill her instantly. But Marcus knew there was more to the story. Elena had been upset about something when she left the office that evening. Her usually perfect composure had been cracked, her hands shaking as she gathered her purse and coat. She had said she needed to tell him something important, something that couldn't wait until morning. "It's about your investments, Marcus," she had said, her voice tight with tension. "There's something you need to know about the Riverside project." The Riverside project. Marcus had made $50 million from that deal 18 months ago, transforming a rundown neighborhood into luxury condominiums that now housed tech executives and investment bankers. It had been one of his most successful ventures, praised by the city council as the example of urban renewal done right. But Elena had discovered something about that project, something that had shaken her deeply enough to risk everything to tell him about it. The knock on his office door broke through his tortured thoughts like a gunshot in the silence. Marcus froze, his heart beginning to race. Who could possibly be here at this hour? The building's security was military grade, with armed guards, keycard access, and surveillance cameras monitoring every entrance. His executive floor required special clearance that only a handful of people possessed. "Come in," he called, his voice rough from lack of sleep and too much whiskey. The door opened slowly, its hinges creaking with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet office. A small figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway lights. It was a girl, maybe 8 years old, with long dark hair that fell past her shoulders like a curtain of silk. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light, and her eyes seemed far too old for her young face. She wore a simple white dress that looked like it belonged to another era, something a child might have worn in the 1950s. The fabric was clean but seemed to shimmer slightly, as if it wasn't quite solid. Her feet were bare, making no sound as she stepped onto the polished marble floor. "How did you get in here?" Marcus asked, standing up so quickly that his leather chair rolled backward and hit the window with a soft thud. His heart was pounding now, adrenaline flooding his system as his mind tried to process what he was seeing. The penthouse was on the 42nd floor of one of the most secure buildings in the city. Security guards monitored every entrance 24 hours a day. Surveillance cameras tracked every movement in the hallways. Electronic locks required special key cards that were programmed with biometric data. No child could simply walk in undetected, especially not at 3:30 in the morning. The girl didn't answer his question. Instead, she walked toward his desk with slow, deliberate steps, her ancient eyes never leaving his face. In her small hands, she carried a piece of white paper and a black crayon that looked like it had been worn down from heavy use. "I drew something for you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying clearly across the large office. There was something familiar about her voice, a cadence and tone that triggered a memory Marcus couldn't quite place. She approached his desk without fear or hesitation, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there. When she reached the mahogany surface, she carefully placed the paper in the center, right where Marcus usually kept his most important documents. Marcus looked down at the drawing and his blood turned to ice water in his veins. It was crude in the way children's drawings often are, with thick black lines and simple shapes. But there was something deeply disturbing about the image that made his hands begin to tremble. The girl had drawn a woman with long, flowing hair that cascaded down her back. The figure wore a dress that reached to her ankles, and her posture suggested elegance and grace. The proportions were almost right, the details surprisingly accurate for a child's artwork. Marcus could see the careful attention to specific features, the way the woman's hair curved around her shoulders, the particular style of her dress, even the way she held her hands at her sides. But where the face should have been, there was nothing, just blank white paper, as if the woman's features had been erased or never existed at all. "Who is this?" Marcus asked, his voice catching in his throat as he stared at the faceless figure. The girl looked up at him with those unsettling ancient eyes that seemed to hold knowledge no child should possess. When she spoke, her words hit Marcus like a physical blow that knocked the breath from his lungs. "She follows you." Marcus staggered backward, his legs hitting the edge of his chair. His coffee cup, still half full of the strong black brew he had been nursing all night, toppled over and crashed to the floor. The porcelain shattered into a dozen pieces, and the hot liquid spread across the marble in a dark puddle that looked disturbingly like blood. "What did you say?" he whispered, though he had heard her clearly. "She follows you," the girl repeated, her voice taking on an eerie sing-song quality. "She's been following you since the rain night. She's angry because you didn't save her. She's angry because you never tried to find out the truth." Marcus's hands began to shake violently. The rain night. That was Elena's phrase, her special way of describing stormy evenings. She had said they were magical, that rain washed away the old world and brought in something new and clean. She had loved thunderstorms, standing by the windows of his office to watch lightning illuminate the city below. "Elena?" he whispered, the name escaping his lips like a prayer. The girl tilted her head to one side, studying him with an expression that was far too knowing for someone her age. "She wants you to know the truth. About why she was driving to see you that night. About what she found in your files. About the people who died because of your money." Marcus grabbed the edge of his desk to steady himself, his knuckles turning white from the pressure. What truth? What did she find? But when he looked up from the drawing, the girl was gone. The office was empty except for the faceless woman's portrait lying on his desk and the broken coffee cup on the floor. The silence was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. He searched the office frantically, checking behind the furniture, looking in the private bathroom, even opening the coat closet. But there was no trace of the child anywhere. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. With trembling hands, Marcus picked up the drawing again, studying every line and shadow. As he lifted the paper, something small and metallic fell from underneath it, landing on his desk with a tiny clink that sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet room. It was a key, small, old, and tarnished with age, but still functional looking. Engraved on the metal surface was a number, 1127. Storage Unit 1127. Marcus knew that number because Elena had mentioned it several months ago, saying she had rented some space to store old family photographs and documents. At the time, he had thought nothing of it. Elena was organized to a fault, and it made sense that she would want to preserve her family's history. But now, looking at the key in his palm, Marcus realized that Elena had been lying to him. The girl's words echoed in his mind like a curse. "She wants you to know the truth." Marcus had spent 3 months trying to forget that terrible night, trying to bury the guilt and pain that threatened to destroy what little remained of his sanity. He had thrown himself into work, acquired 2 new companies, and donated millions to charity in Elena's memory. But none of it had helped. The nightmares continued, the guilt festered, and the loneliness had become a living thing that fed on his soul. Now, with the faceless woman's drawing in his hands and Elena's secret key in his palm, Marcus understood that there was no escaping the past. The truth had been waiting for him all along, hidden away in Storage Unit 1127. He had to go there. He had to find out what Elena had discovered, what had driven her out into the rain that night with such desperate urgency. What secrets had she uncovered that someone might have killed her to protect? The city lights below seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if the entire metropolis was alive and watching him. In the reflection of his window, Marcus thought he saw a figure standing behind him. A woman with long, flowing hair and an elegant dress, but no face where her features should have been. He spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs, but the office was empty. Just shadows and silence and the lingering scent of Elena's perfume, lavender and vanilla, that seemed to hang in the air like a ghost's whisper. But the drawing on his desk was real. The key in his hand was real. And somewhere in Storage Unit 1127, the truth was waiting to destroy everything Marcus thought he knew about himself and his empire. Marcus grabbed his coat from the closet and headed for the private elevator that would take him down to the parking garage. He had avoided the truth for 3 months, but tonight, the truth had come looking for him in the form of a mysterious child with ancient eyes and a drawing of a woman with no face. As the elevator descended, carrying him down from his tower of glass and steel into the dark heart of the city, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that somewhere in the shadows between floors, a faceless woman was following him, waiting for justice that was 3 months overdue. The girl had said it simply, "She follows you." And Marcus finally understood that Elena would keep following him until he found the courage to face what she had died trying to tell him. The storage facility sat on the outskirts of the city like a forgotten monument to secrets, its rows of metal units stretching into the darkness under flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed with electrical menace. Marcus pulled his black sedan into the empty parking lot at 4:15 in the morning. the only sound the crunch of gravel under his tires and the distant hum of traffic from the interstate. The facility was one of those anonymous places that existed in every city, where people stored the remnants of their lives they couldn't bear to keep, but couldn't bring themselves to throw away. Old furniture, childhood photographs, boxes of memories that accumulated dust and regret in equal measure. Marcus had never understood the appeal of such places, preferring to discard anything that wasn't immediately useful. But now, sitting in his car and staring at the endless rows of identical metal doors, he realized that some secrets were too dangerous to keep close and too important to destroy. He had driven here in complete silence, the faceless woman's drawing on the passenger seat beside him like a malevolent companion. Every red light, every turn, every mile of the journey, he had felt like he was being followed. But whenever he checked his mirrors, there was nothing there except empty streets and the occasional late-night wanderer hurrying through the darkness. The security guard at the entrance gate had been half asleep, barely glancing at Marcus's identification before waving him through. The man probably earned minimum wage to sit in a booth all night, watching over other people's forgotten possessions. He had no idea that one of the city's most powerful men was about to uncover a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and business. Storage Unit 1127 was located in the back row, as far from the main office as possible. Elena had chosen this location carefully, Marcus realized, picking a spot where she could come and go without being observed. The unit was tucked between two larger spaces, almost hidden from view unless someone knew exactly where to look. Marcus walked slowly toward it, the old key heavy in his palm like a piece of lead. His footsteps echoed off the concrete walls of the adjacent units, each sound seeming to bounce back from somewhere unseen in the darkness. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows that moved and shifted with every flicker, creating the illusion that the walls themselves were alive. The lock clicked open easily as if it had been waiting for him all along. The mechanism was well-oiled and smooth, suggesting that Elena had visited this place regularly in the months before her death. Marcus rolled up the metal door, and the smell hit him immediately like a physical blow to his senses. Lavender and vanilla. Elena's signature perfume. The scent she had worn every single day to the office for 5 years. It was the fragrance that had lingered in the elevator after she left, that had scented the air during their late-night working sessions, that had made his sterile corporate environment feel somehow more human and alive. But now the scent carried undertones of something else. Paper and ink, dust and secrets, the smell of investigation and obsession. Elena had spent countless hours in this small metal box, piecing together a puzzle that had ultimately cost her life. Inside the storage unit, cardboard boxes were stacked neatly against the walls with Elena's characteristic precision. Each box was labeled with dates and categories in her meticulous handwriting. Financial records 2018-2019, city planning documents, interview transcripts, photographic evidence. But it wasn't the boxes that made Marcus's blood run cold with sudden terror. It was the photographs. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, pinned to a massive bulletin board that covered the entire back wall of the storage unit. Pictures of Marcus at restaurants, shaking hands with business partners, walking to his car, entering and leaving buildings throughout the city. Some were taken from far away with a telephoto lens, capturing him in unguarded moments when he thought he was alone. Others were close-up shots taken when he wasn't looking, showing details of his expressions and body language that revealed more than he had ever intended to show. But these weren't the random photographs of an obsessed fan or deranged stalker. These were surveillance photos, taken with professional equipment and organized with systematic precision. Each image was numbered, dated, and annotated with detailed notes in Elena's careful script. In the corner of every photograph was a timestamp, going back over 2 years, creating a comprehensive record of Marcus's movements and activities. Elena had been watching him, documenting his every move, building a case against him with the thoroughness of an FBI investigation. But a case for what? And why? Marcus stepped closer to the bulletin board, his heart pounding so hard he could feel the pulse in his temples. In the center of the display, occupying the position of honor, was a photograph he had never seen before. It showed him shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit, both of them smiling for the camera in what appeared to be a private dining room. The man's face was circled in red marker, and underneath someone had written in Elena's handwriting, "Victor Reyes, the architect." Marcus remembered that meeting with crystal clarity now. It had been 18 months ago, in a private dining room at the Ritz-Carlton downtown. Victor Reyes had contacted him through intermediaries, presenting himself as a real estate developer with an exclusive investment opportunity. The man had been smooth, sophisticated, and persuasive, with connections throughout the city government and an impressive portfolio of successful projects. Victor had proposed a massive development in the Riverside district, an area of the city that had been home to low-income families for 3 generations. The neighborhood was run down, he had explained, filled with aging buildings that were barely habitable and streets that had become havens for crime and drugs. The city was ready to embrace progress, to transform this blighted area into something the entire community could be proud of. The financial projections had been irresistible. Marcus's $50 million investment would be leveraged with city bonds and federal grants to create a $200 million development of luxury condominiums, upscale retail spaces, and modern office buildings. The returns were projected at 40% over 3 years, with the added benefit of improving the city's tax base and eliminating a problematic neighborhood. Marcus had signed the contracts without hesitation. Within 6 months, the entire Riverside district had been demolished. Hundreds of families had been relocated to temporary housing, with promises that they would have first priority when new affordable units were constructed. The media had praised the project as an example of urban renewal done right, and Marcus had been featured on the cover of Forbes magazine as a visionary investor who understood how to create value while serving the public good. But now, looking at Elena's research wall, Marcus was beginning to see the Riverside project in a very different light. He opened the first box with hands that shook like an old man's, despite his relative youth. Inside were documents that told a story he had never bothered to learn. Contracts between Victor Reyes and various city officials, financial records showing payments that couldn't be easily explained, correspondence between developers and politicians that spoke in coded language about expediting approvals and managing community concerns. Everything was highlighted and annotated in Elena's careful handwriting, with notes that revealed the systematic corruption behind the Riverside project. Victor Reyes hadn't just proposed a development, he had orchestrated a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of city government. The deeper Marcus dug into the documents, the clearer the pattern became. The Riverside district hadn't been condemned because it was unsafe or blighted. It had been targeted because the land was valuable, and the residents were powerless to fight back. City inspectors had been bribed to file false safety reports. Zoning officials had been paid to reclassify the area for commercial development. Even the police had been involved, escalating minor incidents to create a narrative of crime and dysfunction that justified the forced relocations. But the most damning evidence was financial. Marcus found bank records showing payments from Victor Reyes to a network of shell companies, which in turn had made donations to political campaigns and consulting fees to city officials. The money trail was complex but clear. The entire Riverside project had been built on a foundation of bribery and corruption, and Marcus had unknowingly provided the funding that made it all possible. But the revelation that truly broke his spirit was waiting in the second box, in a manila folder labeled "The Morales Family," in Elena's precise script. Inside were photographs that told the story of a family destroyed by his investment. Isabella Morales, a young mother working 2 jobs to support her children. Her 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, a bright-eyed girl with long dark hair who dreamed of becoming an artist. Her baby son, Miguel, who had been born with respiratory problems that required expensive medical treatments. The Morales family had lived in a small apartment in the Riverside district for 7 years. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor of an old building that had seen better days, but it was home. Isabella worked as a hotel housekeeper during the day and cleaned office buildings at night, barely earning enough to pay rent and buy medication for Miguel's breathing treatments, but they had been making it work. Sophia was thriving in school, showing remarkable artistic talent despite their financial struggles. Miguel's condition was stable with proper medication. Isabella had even managed to save a small amount each month toward eventually buying a house in a better neighborhood. Then the condemnation notices arrived. The city had declared their building unsafe for habitation, citing structural problems and code violations that the residents had never been told about. Families were given 30 days to relocate, with promises of assistance finding new housing and priority placement in the affordable units that would be built as part of the redevelopment. But those promises had been lies. The Morales family, like hundreds of others, had been forced to find housing in the only places they could afford on such short notice. Isabella had managed to secure a cheaper apartment across town, but the new building was in even worse condition than the one they had left. The walls were thin, the heating system barely worked, and worst of all, there was a serious mold problem that the landlord refused to address. Miguel's respiratory condition, which had been manageable in their old home, became a medical emergency in the new environment. The mold spores triggered severe asthma attacks that required increasingly expensive treatments. Isabella found herself choosing between paying rent and buying her son's medication, a choice no parent should ever have to make. Sophia, meanwhile, was struggling to adjust to a new school in a different part of the city. She had lost all her friends, her familiar surroundings, and the community that had supported her artistic development. Her drawings, once filled with bright colors and happy scenes, became dark and troubled, reflecting the chaos that had consumed her family's life. The final tragedy was documented in medical records that Elena had somehow obtained. 3 weeks after the family moved to their new apartment, Miguel Morales died during an asthma attack that his mother couldn't afford to treat properly. The cause of death was listed as respiratory failure, but Elena's notes told the real story. The boy had died because his family's home had been destroyed for profit, but Miguel wasn't the only casualty. According to the documents Elena had compiled, Sofia Morales had died just 2 months later. The official cause was listed as complications from pneumonia, but the medical records revealed a different truth. The 8-year-old girl had developed a severe respiratory infection from the mold in their new apartment. Without proper medical insurance or the money for adequate treatment, the infection had progressed to pneumonia and then to septic shock. Sofia Morales, the bright-eyed girl who had dreamed of becoming an artist, had died in a charity hospital ward, surrounded by strangers instead of the community that had once been her home. Marcus felt physically sick as he read Elena's careful documentation of the family's destruction. He had never looked beyond the profit margins and investment returns of the Riverside project. To him, the demolished neighborhood had been nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet, assets to be leveraged for maximum financial gain. But Elena had seen the human cost. She had researched every displaced family, documented every consequence of Marcus's business deal, and discovered that his $50 million investment had funded a conspiracy that killed children. At the bottom of the Morales family folder was a letter written in Elena's handwriting but never sent. The paper was wrinkled as if it had been crumpled up and then smoothed out many times. The ink was smeared in places, suggesting that Elena had been crying while she wrote it. "Marcus," the letter began, "I know you didn't mean for this to happen. I've worked for you for 5 years and I know you're not intentionally cruel. You're driven by success and profit, but I've never seen you take pleasure in other people's suffering. That's why I'm struggling with how to tell you what I've discovered. Sofia Morales is dead because of money you invested. Her little brother Miguel is dead because of a deal you signed. Their mother Isabella is now homeless, living in her car, because your investment funded a conspiracy that destroyed their neighborhood and killed her children. I've been investigating the Riverside project for 8 months, trying to understand how something that was supposed to help the city ended up causing so much pain. What I found is a systematic scheme to displace poor families and steal their homes for private profit. Victor Reyes used your money, along with investments from other wealthy individuals, to bribe city officials and orchestrate the destruction of an entire community. You were lied to, Marcus, we both were. But that doesn't change the fact that children are dead because of decisions we were involved in making. I can't keep working for you, knowing what I know, unless you help me make this right. The Morales family deserves justice. Sofia and Miguel deserve to be remembered as more than just collateral damage in a real estate deal. Isabella deserves compensation for what she's lost, and more importantly, She deserves to know that someone cares about what happened to her children. I'm going to tell you everything when I see you tonight. I hope you'll listen with your heart instead of your business instincts. I hope you'll help me expose Victor Reyes and make sure this never happens to another family. But even if you don't, I can't stay silent anymore. Too many people have died for me to protect your reputation or your business interests. I believe you're a better man than you think you are, Marcus. I believe you can choose to do the right thing even when it costs you something. I'm taking this risk because I have faith that the man I've worked beside for 5 years will choose justice over profit when he finally understands what's at stake. Please don't prove me wrong. Elena. Marcus's hands trembled as he read the letter that Elena had never had the chance to deliver. This was what she had wanted to tell him that night 3 months ago. This was why she had been driving through the rain, upset and desperate to see him before she lost her courage. Elena had discovered that his investment had killed 2 children, and she couldn't live with keeping that secret. She had spent months building a case against Victor Reyes, documenting the conspiracy, and preparing to risk everything to seek justice for families he had never bothered to learn about. But she had never made it to their dinner meeting. She had died in the rain carrying the weight of Sofia and Miguel Morales' deaths and the hope that Marcus would prove himself worthy of her faith in his essential goodness. Marcus sank to his knees in the storage unit, surrounded by the evidence of his willful blindness and moral cowardice. Elena had tried to be his conscience, and it had killed her. She had believed he could be a better man than he had ever been, and she had died before he could prove her right or wrong. A sound behind him made him turn, his heart stopping as he saw a small figure standing in the doorway of the storage unit. The same little girl from his office, still wearing her white dress, still possessing those ancient knowing eyes. But now Marcus could see her face clearly in the harsh fluorescent light of the storage facility. The heart-shaped face, the small nose, the serious expression that suggested wisdom far beyond her years. And suddenly, with a shock of recognition that felt like ice water in his veins, Marcus understood exactly who she was. It was Sofia Morales, the 8-year-old girl who had died because of his investment, because of his willful ignorance, because of his obsession with profit over people. "You didn't save her," Sofia said, her voice echoing off the metal walls of the storage unit with supernatural clarity. "Elena tried to tell you about us, but you were too busy counting your money to listen. Too important to care about poor children dying in moldy apartments." Marcus tried to speak, but no words would come out of his throat. His vocal cords seemed paralyzed by the weight of his guilt and the supernatural impossibility of what he was experiencing. "She follows you now," Sofia continued, pointing with one small finger toward the shadows behind Marcus. "The woman with no face. Elena lost herself trying to find justice for me and Miguel. She died carrying our story, and now she's trapped between worlds, watching you, waiting for you to become the man she believed you could be." Marcus turned slowly to look where Sofia was pointing, and there in the shadows between the stacked boxes he saw her. Elena Martinez, his assistant, his conscience, his victim. But her face was gone, erased just like in the child's drawing. Where her features should have been was nothing but smooth, blank skin, as if her identity had been stolen along with her life. The faceless woman who had been following him for 3 months, appearing in reflections and shadows, haunting his dreams and destroying his peace, was Elena. She was trapped in some liminal space between life and death, unable to rest until the truth she had died trying to reveal was finally brought to light. "What do you want from me?" Marcus whispered, finding his voice at last. Sofia's expression didn't change, but there was something almost pitying in her ancient eyes. "She wants you to finish what she started. She wants you to expose Victor Reyes and make sure no more children die for rich men's profit. But most of all, she wants you to save the ones who are still alive." "What do you mean?" "My mother," Sofia said simply. "Isabella Morales. She's still alive, but not for long. She's been living in her car for 3 months, slowly dying of grief and sickness and despair. Elena found her just before the accident. She was going to ask you to help, to use some of your billions to save one woman's life." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. In all his agonizing over the Riverside project, all his focus on the corruption and conspiracy, He had never once thought about what happened to the survivors. Isabella Morales had lost both her children and her home because of his investment, and she was still out there somewhere, struggling to survive in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. "Where is she?" Marcus asked. Elena knew, Sophia replied. "She found her 3 weeks before she died. The address is in the last box, along with everything else you need to know about Victor Reyes and the people who helped him destroy our neighborhood." Sophia's form began to fade as she spoke, becoming translucent in the fluorescent light. "But you should know something else, Mr. Whitmore. Elena's death wasn't an accident. Victor Reyes found out about her investigation. The truck driver who killed her was paid to make sure she never got to tell you the truth." The revelation hit Marcus like a lightning bolt. Elena had been murdered. The car accident had been arranged, a professional hit disguised as a traffic incident. She had died because she had been willing to risk everything for justice, because she had believed Marcus was worth saving from his own moral blindness. Elena knew she was in danger, Sophia continued, her voice growing fainter as her image became more ghostly. But she didn't run, she didn't hide. She kept fighting because she believed in doing what was right, because she loved you enough to die for the possibility that you might become a better man. And then Sophia was gone, vanishing like morning mist, leaving Marcus alone with the evidence of his complicity and the ghost of the woman who had died trying to save his soul. In the oppressive silence of the storage unit, Marcus finally understood the choice that lay before him. He could walk away, pretend he had never found Elena's research, and return to his comfortable life of willful ignorance and profitable blindness. Or he could honor Elena's sacrifice by finishing what she had started, no matter what it cost him personally. For the first time in 3 months, Marcus knew exactly what he had to do. Marcus spent the next 2 hours in that cramped storage unit, methodically going through every box, every document, every piece of evidence that Elena had painstakingly assembled during the final months of her life. With each revelation, each damning photograph, each recorded conversation, the scope of Victor Reyes's conspiracy became more clear and more horrifying. Elena hadn't just uncovered a simple case of corruption. She had exposed a systematic machine designed to steal from the poor and give to the rich, operating with surgical precision across multiple neighborhoods throughout the city. The Riverside Project was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, a single note in a symphony of organized theft that had been playing for years. In the third box, Marcus found detailed financial records showing how the scheme worked. Victor Reyes operated through a network of shell companies, each one designed to obscure the money trail and protect the wealthy investors who funded his operations. He would identify neighborhoods where poor families had managed to create stable communities, then systematically destroy those communities through manufactured crises. First, he would arrange for city inspectors to find violations in older buildings, many of which had been overlooked for decades. The buildings would be condemned on short notice, forcing families to relocate quickly and cheaply. Then, Victor's companies would purchase the condemned properties for a fraction of their actual value, often through foreclosure actions that the displaced families couldn't afford to fight. Once the land was acquired, Victor would use his political connections to rezone the area for luxury development. The same city officials who had condemned the original buildings would approve massive construction projects that generated enormous profits for Victor and his investors. The displaced families, meanwhile, would be forgotten, left to struggle in substandard housing with no legal recourse and no political representation. But Elena had discovered something even more sinister. Victor Reyes wasn't just destroying neighborhoods randomly. He was targeting specific communities based on demographic research that identified families who would be unable to fight back effectively. Single mothers, elderly residents, undocumented immigrants, families with medical bills that had destroyed their credit. These were the people whose homes were stolen to build luxury condominiums for tech executives and investment bankers. The fourth box contained what Elena had labeled the human cost, detailed profiles of the families who had been destroyed by Victor's machine. The Morales family was just one example among hundreds. There was the Rodriguez family, whose elderly grandfather had died of a heart attack 3 days after being forced to leave the home where he had lived for 40 years. There was the Chen family, whose autistic son had been thriving in a supportive community until the forced relocation triggered a psychological breakdown that required expensive psychiatric treatment they couldn't afford. Each file told a story of lives shattered for profit, of families torn apart by the machinery of gentrification disguised as urban improvement. Elena had interviewed dozens of displaced residents, documenting their struggles with homelessness, medical bankruptcy, family separation, and despair. She had tracked the ripple effects of each displacement: children forced to change schools, elderly residents cut off from their support networks, small business owners driven into bankruptcy when their customer base was scattered to the winds. But the most damaging evidence was in the fifth box: recorded conversations between Victor Reyes and his co-conspirators, captured through surveillance equipment that Elena had somehow managed to deploy. Marcus's hands shook as he listened to audio files on Elena's laptop, hearing Victor's voice discussing his victims with the casual indifference of a farmer planning which crops to harvest. "The Martinez building is perfect for the next phase," Victor's voice said through the laptop speakers. "Mostly single mothers, couple of old-timers who don't speak English well, some illegals who won't make trouble. We can have them out in 30 days, no problem." Another voice, which Elena had identified as City Councilman Robert Hayes, responded with bureaucratic precision. "I'll have the inspectors file the safety violations next week. How much do you need them to find?" "Enough to justify immediate evacuation," Victor replied. "Structural damage, electrical hazards, the usual. Make sure it sounds scary enough that the media won't ask too many questions." The conversation continued, detailing exactly how the conspiracy operated at the highest levels of city government. Marcus listened in growing horror as these men discussed destroying families' lives with the same casual tone they might use to plan a golf game. But the recording that truly broke Marcus's heart was the last one Elena had made, just 3 days before her death. In it, Victor Reyes was discussing the problem of Elena's investigation with someone Elena had identified only as the client, a mysterious figure who seemed to coordinate the entire operation from behind the scenes. "She's gotten too close," Victor said, his voice tight with concern. "Martinez has bank records, photos, recordings. If she goes public, we're all finished." The client's voice was electronically distorted, but his meaning was clear. "Then make sure she doesn't go public, permanently." "You're talking about murder," Victor protested, though he didn't sound particularly shocked by the suggestion. "I'm talking about protecting a very profitable operation that benefits a lot of important people," the client replied coldly. "Elena Martinez is a secretary who stumbled onto something bigger than she understands. She's expendable. Make it look like an accident." Marcus felt sick as he realized he was listening to Elena's death sentence being pronounced. She had known she was in danger. Her final notes mentioned feeling watched, finding evidence that her apartment had been searched, noticing cars following her. But she had continued her investigation anyway, driven by a moral courage that Marcus had never possessed. The last entry in Elena's research journal was dated the day before her death. "They know I'm investigating. Someone broke into my apartment last night while I was at work. Nothing was stolen, but my research files had been moved, photographs were missing from my camera, and my computer showed signs of being accessed. I think they've been watching me the same way I've been watching the case. Victor Reyes has people everywhere: city council, police department, mayor's office. I don't know who I can trust in official channels. The only person with enough power and resources to stop this is Marcus, but I don't know if he'll listen when I tell him his money has been used to kill children. I've moved all my evidence to the storage unit. If something happens to me, everything is in Unit 1127. I hid the key in Marcus's desk drawer 3 weeks ago, taped under the bottom of the main drawer. I figured it was the one place they would never think to look, and if I disappear, maybe Marcus will find it eventually. I know I should run. I know I should just disappear and let someone else fight this battle. But every time I think about Sofia Morales and all the other children who died because adults were too greedy or too cowardly to protect them, I know I can't walk away. I'm meeting Marcus tomorrow night for dinner. I'm going to tell him everything. About the Riverside Project, about Victor Reyes, about the families that were destroyed. I just hope he cares enough to help me stop this machine before it kills more children. If I don't survive this, I hope whoever finds these files will have more courage than I've had. I hope they'll remember that every document here represents a real person whose life was destroyed for profit. I hope they'll fight for justice even when it's dangerous. I believe Marcus is a better man than he knows. I believe he can choose to do the right thing when he finally understands what's at stake. I'm betting my life on that belief. I just hope I'm right. Marcus closed the journal with tears streaming down his face. Elena had died believing in him, trusting that he would find her evidence and have the courage to act on it. She had sacrificed her life for the possibility that he might become the man she thought he could be. But Elena's investigation had revealed something else. Marcus wasn't Victor Reyes's only victim. The conspiracy involved dozens of wealthy investors who had unknowingly funded the destruction of poor communities. Elena had identified at least 15 other major figures who had invested millions in Victor's schemes, all of them believing they were participating in legitimate urban development projects. Among the names on Elena's list were some of the most powerful people in the city: tech billionaires, real estate moguls, political donors, and corporate executives. All of them had been manipulated by Victor Reyes, just as Marcus had been. But their ignorance didn't absolve them of responsibility for the consequences of their investments. Elena had also uncovered evidence that Victor's operation extended beyond the city limits. Similar schemes were operating in Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, and New York, all coordinated by the mysterious client who seemed to orchestrate displacement operations across the country. The Riverside Project was just one small part of a national conspiracy to transfer wealth from poor communities to rich investors through systematic fraud and corruption. As dawn broke over the storage facility, Marcus finally understood the full scope of what Elena had discovered and why she had been killed to keep it secret. She hadn't just stumbled onto a local corruption scandal. She had exposed a machine that was systematically destroying poor communities across America, generating billions in profits for wealthy investors who never had to see the human cost of their business deals. But understanding the conspiracy was only the first step. Marcus still had to decide what to do with Elena's evidence, and he still had to find Isabella Morales before it was too late to save at least one victim of his investment decisions. In the final box, Marcus found the address Elena had mentioned, Walmart parking lot, 5th Street, where Isabella Morales had been living in her car for the past 3 months. Elena's notes described a woman broken by grief and poverty, struggling to survive while slowly dying of illness and despair. Isabella Morales, age 34, Elena had written. Lost her apartment in the Riverside demolition. Both children died within 8 weeks of the forced relocation. Has been living in her 2016 Honda Civic since her landlord evicted her for non-payment of rent. Works part-time cleaning houses when she can find employment, but depression and health problems make it difficult to maintain steady work. Diagnosed with type 2 diabetes but cannot afford medication. Has lost approximately 30 pounds since her children's deaths. Avoids homeless shelters due to past traumatic experiences. Sleeps in different parking lots each night to avoid being hassled by police or security guards. Tried to approach her twice. First time she drove away as soon as she saw me coming. Second time she agreed to talk but became agitated when I mentioned the Riverside Project. She's terrified that speaking out will bring more trouble on her head. Needs medical attention urgently, has been rationing insulin and shows signs of diabetic complications. Potential approach. Emphasize that Marcus wants to help, not because of legal obligation but because he genuinely cares about what happened to her family. She needs to know that someone in power finally knows her children's names and wants to honor their memory. Marcus carefully gathered all of Elena's evidence and loaded it into his car. The sun was rising over the city as he prepared to drive to the Walmart parking lot where Isabella Morales was struggling to survive. But first, he had one more revelation to absorb. As he turned to leave the storage unit, he saw Sofia Morales standing near the entrance, her small form silhouetted against the morning light. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Elena, still faceless, but somehow more present than before. "You found the truth," Sofia said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "Elena died to give it to you. Now what are you going to do with it?" Marcus looked at the ghost of the woman who had believed in him enough to die for that belief. "I'm going to finish what she started," he said. "I'm going to find your mother and help her heal." Then I'm going to destroy Victor Reyes and everyone who helped him murder children for profit." Sophia smiled for the first time since he had met her. "Elena always said you were better than you knew. She said you just needed someone to show you the way." As Marcus walked toward his car carrying Elena's evidence and her faith in his capacity for redemption, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 months. Hope. Not for his own salvation, but for the possibility that Sofia and Miguel Morales hadn't died in vain. The faceless woman in the shadows behind Sofia raised one hand in what might have been a wave goodbye or a gesture of encouragement. Elena was still following him, but now Marcus understood why. She wasn't haunting him for revenge. She was guiding him toward the justice she had died trying to achieve. For the first time since that terrible rainy night 3 months ago, Marcus Whitmore knew exactly who he needed to become. Marcus drove through the empty streets as dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold that seemed to promise redemption for those brave enough to seek it. The documents from Elena's storage unit sat in a briefcase on his passenger seat, along with the faceless woman's drawing that had started this journey into the heart of his own moral bankruptcy. But now he carried something else. Purpose. For the first time in 3 months, Marcus Whitmore knew exactly where he was going and why. The Walmart parking lot on 5th Street was nearly empty at 5:30 in the morning, just a few early shift workers grabbing coffee and supplies before starting their day. Marcus drove slowly through the rows of spaces, his heart pounding as he searched for what Elena had described in her notes. In the far corner, away from the lights and foot traffic, tucked between a dumpster and a chain-link fence where she could remain invisible to casual observers, he found her. Isabella Morales sat in the driver's seat of an old Honda Civic that had seen better days. The car's paint was faded, one hubcap was missing, and a spiderweb of cracks spread across the windshield from a small impact point. The windows were fogged with condensation from her breath, and Marcus could see her silhouette inside, wrapped in what appeared to be a thin blanket. She looked smaller than in the photographs Elena had taken, more fragile and broken than any person should have to be. Marcus parked his sedan a respectful distance away, not wanting to trap her or make her feel cornered. He sat for a moment, gathering his courage and trying to find the right words for what might be the most important conversation of his life. How do you approach a woman whose children you helped kill? How do you apologize for destroying someone's entire world while you counted your profits? He approached on foot, walking slowly and keeping his hands visible to show he meant no harm. When he tapped gently on the passenger window, Isabella startled awake, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from months of living on the edge of survival. She looked at him through the cracked glass, taking in his expensive clothes and confident bearing, and Marcus could see her calculating whether she needed to start the car and flee. "Please," Marcus said softly, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not police. I'm not security. I'm not anyone who wants to cause you trouble. I'm here about Sofia and Miguel." At her children's names, Isabella's expression changed from fear to a complex mixture of anguish, hope, and desperate longing. Tears began to form in her eyes as she rolled down the window just a crack, enough to hear him but ready to close it again at the first sign of danger. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse and grief. "How do you know my children's names?" Marcus felt his throat close up as he prepared to deliver the words that would either begin his redemption or confirm his damnation. "My name is Marcus Whitmore. I was the one who invested in the development that destroyed your home. I'm the one whose money paid for the destruction of the Riverside district." The words felt like shards of glass cutting his throat as he spoke them. He watched Isabella's face as she processed what he had told her, saw the recognition dawn in her eyes as she connected his name to the nightmare that had consumed her family. "You're him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're the rich man who signed the papers, the one who paid them to tear down our neighborhood and kill my babies." "Yes," Marcus said simply, making no attempt to defend himself or minimize his responsibility. "And I'm here to make it right." Isabella's laugh was harsh and bitter, the sound of someone who had lost everything and found that the world had no comfort to offer. "Make it right? My daughter is dead, Mr. Whitmore. My little boy is dead. My home is gone, my job is gone, my life is gone. I've been living in my car for 3 months, slowly dying of diabetes because I can't afford insulin. How exactly do you plan to make that right? Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph of Elena Martinez, the woman who had died trying to seek justice for the Morales family. This woman worked for me. Her name was Elena Martinez, and she discovered what really happened to your family. She spent months investigating the Riverside Project, documenting how you and hundreds of other families were systematically defrauded and displaced. She was murdered 3 months ago because she was going to expose the conspiracy that destroyed your neighborhood. Isabella's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Elena's picture. I remember her. She came to the homeless shelter where I was staying, asking questions about the families from the old neighborhood. She said someone was going to pay for what happened to us. She said she was going to make sure the people responsible faced justice. She was right, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger as he thought about Elena's sacrifice and determination. And that starts right now with you. For the next 2 hours, Marcus sat on the curb beside Isabella's car as she gradually opened the window wider and eventually agreed to step outside and talk to him properly. He told her everything Elena had discovered: the systematic corruption, the bribes to city officials, the targeting of vulnerable families, the network of wealthy investors who had unknowingly funded the destruction of communities across the city. Isabella listened in stunned silence as Marcus laid out the scope of the conspiracy that had destroyed her life. He showed her the documents Elena had compiled, the recorded conversations between Victor Reyes and his co-conspirators, the evidence that her children's deaths had been the predictable result of a calculated scheme to transfer wealth from poor families to rich investors. Victor Reyes specifically targeted your building because he knew the families living there would be unable to fight back effectively, Marcus explained, his voice heavy with guilt. Single mothers, elderly residents, families with medical expenses. You were chosen to be victims because someone decided your lives were worth less than the profit they could make from your land. Isabella's hands shook as she looked through Elena's research files. Sophia drew pictures of the houses she wanted to live in someday, she said, her voice breaking. She used to show me her drawings and tell me about the yard where Miguel could play and the room where she could keep all her art supplies. She never got to see any of it. Marcus felt tears on his cheeks as he thought about the 8-year-old girl whose death had set this entire chain of events in motion. I'm so sorry, Isabella. I'm sorry I didn't know what was happening. I'm sorry I was too selfish and greedy to care about the consequences of my investments. I'm sorry your children paid the price for my moral blindness. Being sorry won't bring them back, Isabella said, but there was less anger in her voice now, and more exhaustion. Nothing will bring them back. No, Marcus agreed. But maybe their deaths can save other children if we work together to stop Victor Reyes and expose this conspiracy. Elena died believing that justice was possible, that people like Sophia and Miguel could be remembered and honored instead of just forgotten as collateral damage. Isabella was quiet for a long time, staring at a photograph of her children that she kept taped to her dashboard. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. What do you want from me? I want to help you survive, Marcus said. I want to give you a safe place to live, medical care so you don't have to ration your insulin, and enough money to rebuild your life in whatever way feels right to you. But more than that, I want to finish what Elena started. I want to expose Victor Reyes and make sure no other family suffers what you've suffered. Isabella looked at him directly for the first time, studying his face with the intensity of someone who had learned not to trust easily. Why should I believe you? Why should I trust the man who helped destroy my family? Marcus met her gaze without flinching. Because Elena believed in me enough to die for that belief. Because your children deserved better than what this world gave them. And because if we don't stop this machine, it's going to keep crushing families just like yours until someone with power decides to stand up and fight. Isabella was quiet for a long time, lost in memories that Marcus could only imagine. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of steel that hadn't been there before. Sophia loved to draw pictures of houses, she said. Beautiful houses with big windows and flower gardens and swing sets in the backyard. She used to tell me that someday we would live in one of those houses, and Miguel would get better, and we would all be happy. She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. She never got to see that house, Mr. Whitmore. But maybe if we stop these people, some other little girl will get to keep her home and her family and her dreams. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of the guilt and self-hatred that had consumed him for 3 months. Does that mean you'll help me? Isabella nodded slowly. Elena Martinez died trying to get justice for my children. The least I can do is help you finish what she started. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the conference room of the city's largest newspaper, surrounded by journalists, FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and representatives from the Attorney General's office. The evidence Elena had gathered was spread across multiple tables like a roadmap of corruption that stretched from City Hall to Wall Street. The investigation had moved with unprecedented speed once Marcus provided Elena's research to federal authorities. Victor Reyes had been arrested in a dawn raid on his mansion, along with 6 city officials, 4 police supervisors, and 12 other conspirators. The conspiracy charges were federal, carrying potential sentences of 20 years or more. But Victor hadn't been the only one arrested. Following the money trail Elena had documented, federal agents had uncovered a national network of similar schemes operating in 8 major cities. The mysterious client, who had coordinated the operations, turned out to be a consortium of hedge funds and private equity firms that specialized in extracting value from distressed communities. The financial scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Over $3 billion in fraudulent real estate transactions, hundreds of displaced communities, thousands of families destroyed for profit. The media was calling it the largest housing fraud case in American history. Marcus had cooperated fully with the investigation, providing not only Elena's evidence, but also opening his own financial records to federal scrutiny. He had testified before grand juries, given depositions to prosecutors, and spoken publicly about his role in funding the destruction of the Riverside district. The personal cost had been enormous. Marcus's business empire was under federal investigation. His assets were frozen pending the outcome of multiple lawsuits, and his reputation was destroyed. Former friends avoided him, business partners distanced themselves from his companies, and the media portrayed him as either a criminal mastermind or a useful idiot for more sophisticated criminals. But Marcus found that he didn't care about any of that. For the first time in his adult life, he was more concerned with doing the right thing than with protecting his wealth and status. Elena's faith in his capacity for redemption had transformed him in ways that surprised even himself. The real victory wasn't in the headlines or the arrests or the federal investigations. It was in the small apartment across town where Isabella Morales was learning to sleep in a real bed again, where she was receiving proper medical treatment for her diabetes, where she was slowly beginning to trust that the world might have some goodness left in it. Marcus had purchased a modest house in a quiet neighborhood and signed the deed over to Isabella, along with a trust fund that would provide for her needs for the rest of her life. But more importantly, he had helped her find her voice as an advocate for housing rights and community protection. Isabella had testified before Congress about the human cost of predatory development, spoken at conferences about the need for stronger protections for vulnerable communities, and become the face of a growing movement for housing justice. Her story, and the stories of other families destroyed by the conspiracy, had sparked nationwide reforms in city planning and development oversight. "I speak for Sophia and Miguel," Isabella had told the congressional committee during her testimony. "I speak for all the children who died because adults were too greedy or too cowardly to protect them. Their deaths must mean something. Their lives must be remembered." That evening, as the media circus surrounding the arrests finally began to die down, Marcus returned to his penthouse office for the first time in 3 weeks. The space felt different now, less like a tower of isolation and more like a place where meaningful work could be done. On his desk, he found something that made his heart stop. A new drawing. This one completely different from the faceless woman portrait that had started his journey. It showed a little girl with a heart-shaped face and bright, hopeful eyes, holding hands with a woman whose features were clear and kind and peaceful. At the bottom, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for remembering us." Marcus picked up the drawing with trembling hands and turned toward the window. In the reflection of the glass, he saw Elena standing behind him. But now her face was visible for the first time since her death, beautiful and whole, and filled with the love and forgiveness he had never believed he deserved. She smiled at him once, a smile that conveyed everything she had been unable to say during those final days of her life. She was proud of him. She was grateful that her sacrifice had not been in vain. She was at peace, because justice had finally been served. Sophia appeared beside Elena, no longer trapped between worlds but free to move on to whatever came after death. The little girl who had haunted his dreams and guided his conscience was finally able to rest, knowing that her mother was safe and her story was being told. They stood together for a moment, the woman who had died for justice and the child who had died for profit, united in forgiveness and redemption. Then they faded into the golden light of the setting sun, finally able to find the peace that had been denied to them in life. Marcus kept the drawing on his desk as he began the long work of transforming what remained of his business empire into something Elena would have been proud of. He established the Sofia and Miguel Morales Foundation, dedicated to protecting low-income families from predatory development practices. He funded legal aid clinics that provided free representation to families facing displacement. He supported community organizations that fought to preserve affordable housing and prevent the kind of systematic destruction that had killed the Morales children. The nightmares stopped. Sleep returned, deep and dreamless and restorative. And though Marcus would always carry the weight of what his blindness had cost, he also carried the knowledge that Elena's death had not been meaningless, and that Sophia's dreams of a better world were slowly becoming reality. In the months that followed, Isabella Morales and Marcus Whitmore worked together to expose similar schemes in other cities, traveling the country to speak about the human cost of unchecked development and the need for communities to protect their most vulnerable members. They made an unlikely pair, the billionaire who had funded destruction and the mother who had survived it. But their partnership became a powerful symbol of redemption and healing. And sometimes late at night when Marcus was working in his office, he would catch a glimpse of Elena in the window's reflection. Not the faceless woman who had haunted him during his months of guilt and denial, but the woman who had loved him enough to believe he could change, who had died for the conviction that justice was possible, even in a world corrupted by greed. She had been right about everything. Love had been stronger than guilt. Truth had been stronger than conspiracy, and redemption, when finally embraced, had the power to transform even the most hardened heart. The girl had drawn a woman with no face and said, "She follows you." But Elena had never been following him to punish him or drive him mad with guilt. She had been following him to guide him home to the man he was always meant to be. Marcus Whitmore had spent his entire adult life accumulating wealth and power, believing that success was measured by the size of his bank account and the reach of his influence. But sitting in his office with Sophia's drawing in his hands and Elena's spirit watching over him, he finally understood what Elena had tried to teach him during their 5 years together. The only wealth that mattered was the lives you helped save. The only power worth having was the ability to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And the only success that lasted was the knowledge that when your time came to face judgment, you could say that you had used your gifts to make the world a little bit better than you found it. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the power we all have to choose justice over profit, compassion over indifference, then maybe Elena's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Maybe Sophia and Miguel's deaths can still save other children if enough people decide to open their eyes and see the human cost of their choices. The next story appearing on screen goes even deeper into these themes of redemption and moral awakening. Click and watch it now. And of course, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, leave a comment telling us what this story meant to you, drop a like if it moved you, and share this with someone who needs to hear this message. Because in the end, we're all being followed by the ghosts of our choices. The question is, will we have the courage to turn around and face them?